Good evening and welcome to the Burma Spring Benefit Film Festival. This is part of our ongoing speaker forum featuring quite remarkable human rights defenders, environmental activists, academics, and experts on Burma, Myanmar. Tonight's panel, we are very honored to have joining us a Karen activist, Paul Sein Twa. Paul grew up as a refugee. The Karen are one of the ethnic groups in Myanmar that have endured decades of displacement and human rights violations at the hands of the Myanmar military. And he was among the many tens of thousands of Karen refugees who were displaced along the Thailand-Myanmar border, where he grew up. He has sought to preserve his precious culture of the Karen people, as well as the environment in which they live. And he established a 1.35 million acre peace park, which is known as the Salween Peace Park, several years ago. And he is the co-founder of the Karen Environmental and Social Action Network, known as its acronym KESAN. For his work on behalf of his people and the environment, he received the Goldman Prize for Asia in 2020. And we're really give you a very warm welcome in joining us what is morning for you, Paul, in Thailand. We also have with us Marco Simons. He is from Earth Rights International. Marco uses legal strategies to work with communities around the world, protecting human rights and the environment. He served as a counsel on the transnational corporate accountability cases, including Doe versus Unocal. He has taught human rights and law in college courses, and he worked for the civil rights law firm Hadsel and Stormer, which was co-counsel on the Doe versus Unocal. And thank you very much, Marco, for joining us. And finally, we have Faith Doherty. She is somebody who has been working on issues related to Myanmar, Burma, and Southeast Asia for many decades. Faith is part of the Environmental Investigation Agency, where she leads the Forest Campaign. And she has worked with civil society organizations, including community-based organizations, ethnic and indigenous groups across the region. Her work in the last decade has focused on hardwoods and specifically teak being illegally harvested and transported from Myanmar. So we really appreciate all three of you sharing your valuable time with us tonight. I'm going to start it off with Faith and have her just give us an overarching viewpoint of what is the work that EI does in the region related specifically to Myanmar, and why is teak and hardwood as a whole so important? Is this a revenue for the military junta?
Yes, it is. It's a huge revenue. What we've been working on is with networks in the country, nationwide. We've been focusing on how the government at the time, but also the military, has been plundering the forests in Myanmar from the north to the south. We are now in an even worse situation now since the coup. But we're looking at the forests of Myanmar are more than just about trees. You've got an estimated 17 million people that rely on the forests in Myanmar for their livelihoods, but also their welfare. We estimate around 2.5 billion US dollars flows directly to the regime from Myanmar's natural resources. These are figures that were published through a process in Myanmar called EITI, and which a network called MATA, the Myanmar Accountability Transparency Network, that was also a national network that was forcing transparency in relation to investments and who was actually profiting from Myanmar's natural resources. So what we're looking at is a country that has valuable natural resources, which is, you know, a wonderful thing, but it has also been a curse. I mean, I've been monitoring the logging issue in Myanmar since the 90s. And to be honest with you, there's not much left. Why is teak so valuable? Because of the international market. The main driver at the moment has been for teak decking on super yachts. It is a hardwood that everybody wants. It is the most valuable teak on earth. No other teak is like Myanmar teak. And so, of course, everybody wants it. It's also used for flooring and furniture. And we have been focused on exposing the criminal syndicates who operate from Myanmar in order to get the teak out in huge volumes with massive profit that doesn't benefit anyone other than the individuals involved and the regime.
Thank you very much for giving us that overview, Faith. I'd like to move now to Marco. Marco, I know that you have expertise specifically in the oil and gas industries. How is that a key source of revenue for the military junta to stay in power, even prior to the coup? And what corporations are we looking at? I'd like to just start with quoting a recent excellent report that was done by an investigative team by Reuters into the oil majors in Myanmar. And it states that the major oil companies working in Myanmar are in the spotlight after the United Nations human rights investigator called for coordinated international sanctions on the country's state energy firm MOGE, the acronym MOGE, which is the Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprise. We know that Total of France has investments there. We know that the United States major corporation Chevron has invested there. Can you please give us an overview of both the oil and gas sectors, and does that provide a lining of the coffers for the junta?
Yeah, thank you. Oil and gas revenues, and actually natural gas revenues in particular, are the primary source of foreign exchange income for the Myanmar government and now for the military regime that has taken over the machinery of government in the country, providing around 10% of the total government revenues. That was what their projection was for this year before the coup. Given that the rest of the economy has now essentially collapsed, that is likely to be a significantly higher percentage in reality. So the gas projects are a tremendously significant lifeline for this military regime. And they provide the primary source of foreign exchange income. It's over $1 billion a year. It probably about $1.5 billion this year. It varies a little bit depending on oil prices and production levels. But it is the single largest source of income for the military regime at the moment. Chevron and Total are the major Western companies that are involved in these gas projects. There's an array of other companies involved as well, including companies from Thailand, South Korea, and India, and China. And so Western companies and countries have started to take some steps against the regime. But there's still a lot more that could be done to cut off this vital source of income for the military, and essentially to freeze these payments at the moment while the military is controlling and essentially illegally misappropriating the funds that are flowing in to the Myanmar, to MOGE, the Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprise.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you with some follow-up questions to unpack that for some of our listeners and viewers. All of these issues, of course, ranging from timber to oil, gas, all extractive industries, end up having a tremendous human impact. And that's why I would like to now introduce Paul again. And if you'd like to kindly greet people as well in your native Karen language, and then tell us about the work that you are doing at the Salween Peace Park and the work that KESAN is doing to preserve these communities in your area.
Umusopa in Karen, like greetings in Karen. It can be Walare, good morning, Nilare, good afternoon, good evening, Halare. Yeah, very nice to be given this opportunity to join this whether it's called dialogue or discussions, sharing our experiences. Yeah. Yes. If I can provide a little bit of a background, our current people in Burma, Myanmar, and in particular in Mutra districts, where we established our Salween Peace Corps, people have been facing civil war for more than 7 decades, and everyone knows that there are so many consequences with the armed conflict, causing massive displacement and also causing impact on our culture, our livelihoods, and also our environment. And but people in our people in this area, we still keep and maintaining our culture, our resources, our way of life, and even we've been facing this hardship for so many years. We still have this wealth of our indigenous knowledge, our practices, and so on. So the question for us is, okay, we know that conflict in the country will not end very soon. You know, we're going to face different political changes. And as you know that in the early 2012, there's been the ceasefire. It's happening, and that's sort of changed the political landscape. And we are facing the new threats as well as old threats, right? So how can we really, respond to these new threats? And then also in the future, we still don't know the political situations, which this happened on the 1st February. There's a new military coup. Yeah. So that's why we said that in order to really go through these different challenges and continue to maintain and conserve our environment, our culture, our way of life, we should be able to have a sort of a new initiative, a new platform that bring together people in our territories. And then also not just for ourselves, but for our country and also for our planet Earth, because we indigenous people, we have a very long vision, not just for this generation, but for our future, and also for the nature, for wildlife, for the spiritual being that govern our natural resources. So then we came out with this Peace Park initiative, the Salween Peace Park initiative. Yeah. So as I said before, this Salween Peace Park, we have 3 pillars. One is our peace and self-determination. So we wanted to also live in harmony with our environment, our nature, plants, and wildlife, as well as peace means that we need to be able to have our self-determination. Peace based on self-determinations over our resources, over our way of life, our economy, etc., etc. So we don't want to have a centralized decision-making system. It should be bottom-up. And the second pillar is the cultural survival. As I said, we have a beauty in our current culture there, and we want to still keep maintaining and also pass this culture and wisdom to our children. And the third one is environmental integrity. Everything connected: rivers, land, forests, wildlife, and people. And we want to have that close relationship with our indigenous people and the environment. So this is why we create this Peace Park, and so that whatever changes happening, we should be able to move forward and still keep our culture, our environment, and our way of life. Yeah. So this is what we've been doing, and even now we are under attacks because of the consequences of the military coup on February 1st. We still mobilize ourselves to really respond to this current crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Faith, I'm going to go ahead and share, if I might, some screenshots here from the work that you do with EIA. Is that showing up on everybody's
Yep.
screen? Can you just walk us through what is this process? You know, why is Myanmar teak, as you said, so valuable? And where does it end up? I found it fascinating going through the EIA's materials earlier, which I'm going to continue to share some more photos as you're talking, but how does it work? How is this timber illegally harvested, and how has it gotten out of the country? And walk us through this.
Well, you've basically got the formal trade, and then you've got what we call the informal trade. And underpinning all of it is corruption, essentially, which is, it's not unique just to the forestry sector. There is high level corruption throughout the country, and there always has been. And what we've basically been targeting, what we've been looking at, is the role of the state-owned enterprises. So Marco was talking about Moj and Chevron, you know, he was talking about the oil and gas sector. In the case of timber, it's the Myanmar Timber Enterprise. This has been a state-owned enterprise that is highly corrupt and is run from the top down. And what they do, they are the regulator for the export of the most valuable timber in the country. And of course, that's teak. And so you've got that formal process where you put money down and it's auctioned, and then the timber is supposedly by law supposed to go out of the country through the ports. This doesn't always happen. You've also got the informal sector. And what we've been focusing on are the large criminal syndicates who operate in the country, where they are accessing large amounts of mainly teak, but a lot of hardwoods. In 2014-15, there was an absolutely insane amount of tamalan, which is rosewood, growing in the Salween area that China wanted. And so we just saw this burgeoning illicit trade taking place, where the sheer scale of this was just mind-blowing. And it was being transported across from Myanmar into China. And what we wanted to do was to figure out who was behind it, what were the methods, and how much money was being made, not just in Myanmar, but really in China, because they were driving the trade itself. We spent 5 years investigating that, and the result of that was this report and a film that accompanies it, detailing that particular criminal syndicate. In 2019, the Chinese authorities, they did a massive enforcement action on the China side, where they broke the syndicate, arrested various people. But I'm very sad to say that since the coup, what we're looking at here is a space where illicit economies are going to thrive, and they are thriving. And we are getting a lot of reports from really brave monitors on the ground about large scale timber coming across the border again into China. And I fear that we will also be seeing the same in other parts of the country, going to other neighboring countries. So I would say it's hemorrhaging out right now. A lot of the timber right now that is being smuggled out, we believe is from stockpiles. We don't believe these are fresh trees being logged. A lot of that is because where they want to get the trees, there's war. So it's not that easy for foreign truck drivers and syndicates to get their people in to get it out. So what we know is that there are hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of hardwood stockpiled by the military. And that is what we believe is being either sold and auctioned through the formal process, or being smuggled across the land borders to neighboring countries. Where does it go? In China, a lot of it is used domestically, houses, flooring, We have reports of whole beautiful teak houses being built. This is the new fashion. This is what they want. But for us, we've been following the marine sector because we know that there has been a trade since the 90s, particularly to the United States and also to Europe, for the marine sector. This is what they want. They want the best stuff in the world to put on the decking of their ships and their yachts. So we have been working with other civil society organizations in Europe and the United States to look at having legislation in place that would allow for enforcement on illegally sourced timber entering the markets. But now that the coup has happened, we worked really hard and the US answered the call quite quickly for sanctions to be placed upon MTE and individuals who we know and can identify profiting directly from the teak trade. And this is giving us more tools.
The MTE is the Myanmar Timber Enterprise.
That's right. It's the state-owned enterprise. It's the regulator of timber.
And does the military control MTE or?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially now, in the last few weeks, there's been a flurry of auctions. And what we are finding out is that MTE, because of the civil disobedience movement, and because a lot of the civil servants have gone on strike, actually it's not functioning as well as it usually does. And so there's a lot of resistance, even within the state-owned enterprises, to try and stop, the profits going into the military regime.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go, thank you very much. And whilst you were speaking, I was putting up some of the photos, and it's just astonishing when you see the sheer size of some of these trees. They must take years to come to that breadth of growth. Just quite amazing. Marco, we have some visuals that you wanted to share. I'm going to turn to those now. I'm going to just share my screen with your first visual. Give me a moment. This is your first one. Tell us about this. This headline from Reuters.
So I want to talk about oil and gas, but I want to start with the money. So as immediately after the coup happened in February, the new military regime immediately tried to siphon off $1 billion from accounts held by the Central Bank of Myanmar in New York. And the US government, to its credit, blocked that attempt. But what this showed us from the very beginning was that they were going to need access to cash, and specifically hard currency. Most of the government's receipts historically come through local currency, the chat. But they need hard currency for some purposes, including purchase of major military hardware. Can we move on to?
Okay.
We have the. Yeah, and so we've seen this more recently, that this need for cash has persisted, and the domestic banking system is now close to collapse. So they are in desperate need. The regime is in desperate need of injections of cash. They're certainly not getting their regular tax revenue, and the domestic economy has essentially shut down. So that's why a group of economists has essentially suggested that targeting the regime's access to hard currency, foreign currency like US dollars, could be a significant pressure point for this regime right now. And the single largest source of that is offshore natural gas projects like this one here. Now, there are 4 major offshore projects, and they started about 25 years ago. And in fact, my organization, Earth Rights International, was founded originally around documenting human rights abuses and other issues with the first of these projects, the Yadana project, which is the one that is led by Total and Chevron. these are workers on the platform of the Adana project shortly after the coup expressing their support for the civil disobedience movement. So Total's own workers there stood up in favor of opposition to the coup.
Did they face reprisals for doing so?
We have received no reports that they faced direct reprisals for doing so. But Total has expressed concern that if they were to take a stronger stand against the current regime and to block the payments, again, from the Yadana project alone, this is Total and Chevron's project, they're responsible for hundreds of billions of dollars to the regime, probably around $500 million annually from this one project. And Total has argued that if they were to block the payments to the regime, that their workers would be in danger, but their own workers are standing up in favor of the civil disobedience movement. So that seems like a rather disingenuous concern. And in fact, recently, Chevron and Total did vote to suspend some payments to the regime. Now, they may have done this in essentially as essentially a sort of a smokescreen to get people off their back, because they can say that they have stopped some payments to the regime, but what they did put a halt to is a small portion of the overall revenues coming from the Yadana project. So they stopped a revenue stream which is on the order of tens of millions of dollars, which is not nothing. It is an important step forward, but it's a small part of the hundreds of millions of dollars from their overall project. And I think one thing to note is that, you know, the calls for shutting down the revenue from these projects are primarily coming from NGOs and activists inside the country.
Mm-hmm.
It's Myanmar civil society, it's the Myanmar Alliance for Transparency and Accountability that Faith mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's these groups that are calling for a shutdown, and they know that this may result in some interruptions of natural gas to the country.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that the vast majority of this gas does not go to electricity production inside Myanmar. These are export projects. And they were all developed under the previous military regime, which did not care one bit about internal economic development. It was these projects were not created to develop the country's economy. They were created as income generators for the military regime, and that's what they are right now. 80% of the gas is exported mostly to Thailand, and one of the projects goes to China. A little bit of it goes domestically, but a lot of that doesn't go to electricity production. It goes directly to companies that are either controlled directly by the military, mm-hmm. or military crony companies. That this is another form, a sort of direct form of corruption, like Faith was mentioning. And the natural gas industry also employs extremely few people in the country. It is not a driver of local economic development. It is essentially literally siphoning off natural gas from offshore fields, piping it out of the country, and taking the cash for the military's purposes. In some ways, it's almost a perfect case for international sanctions, because the impact on local people from cutting off this revenue stream is so small. And while we started out documenting human rights abuses associated with the construction and operation of these pipeline projects, these projects are now contributing to much larger human rights abuses all across the country by providing this financial lifeline to the regime. But we may also see a return to the human rights abuses associated directly with the projects themselves, because, you know, the very fact that these are the primary foreign exchange income generators for the military regime makes them extremely valuable and potentially high value targets for anyone opposed to the regime, which means we are already seeing an increased militarization around the pipelines. And wherever, unfortunately, even to this day, wherever the Burmese military goes, human rights abuses follow. And so it's sort of a perfect storm of both impacts on the people of Myanmar, but also an opportunity for the international community, including these companies, to put a significant amount of pressure on the regime.
And that's a really good segue to go back to Paul. I'd like to go back to you. The Salween Peace Park, which you helped found and which has been such a source of inspiration and hope for the people of Karen State, was actually targeted for attack by the Myanmar military in early April, including aerial attacks. It resulted in displacing tens of thousands of ethnic Karen villagers. And while you are speaking, I'd like to have your permission to share some images, including a report, Terror from the Skies, the bombing of the Mutra district, which is one of the Karen districts that led to the displacement of these civilians who are living in appalling conditions now as internally displaced persons, IDPs, as opposed to refugees. So many of them hiding in the forests, having run for their lives. Tell us about what happened to the Salween Peace Park and what the result has been upon the colleagues with whom you work at KESAN and the risks you're taking to continue the work that you're doing.
Thanks. Yes, as in this report, we explained what's really going on, especially since the coup, on February 1st. And then, yes, but actually the artillery, what you call it, shellings, has been intensified since the late 2020, in December, and then coming up to the 1st February, then more mortar shellings into communities, into villages, into farmlands area, and then on March 27th of this year, we have seen the first aerial attacks, as you said, in 25 years time that we faced, and it's also happened during nighttime. So that is really showing the capability of the regime, and then really like terrorize people, and then that's why most of the villages that really close to the area where they bombed is kind of fled into the jungle or are hiding. And many of them also cross the border into Thailand temporarily. So that's happening now. And then, since then, like a aerial survey or reconnaissance or something like that happening on a daily basis. That's why people are afraid to really stay in their village, because, what happened on the first on the 27th of February, March, and then up to early April. It's difficult to say whether the military, the Burmese military, really target the KNU area or camps or really civilian area. We cannot tell. You can see these also schools building being also bombed and destroyed. And so, that's why people are really afraid to go back. And as much as 70 to 90,000 people being displaced on off, often move away from the village and then come back for a few days, and it's continued to live like that. But for us and our colleagues, we continue to provide emergency relief, coordinating with our other civil society organizations and providing the humanitarian assistance. And then also, we also coordinate with our colleagues on the ground, and then also provide information and also still supporting the peace park leaders in order to really respond to the current crisis. So that's been really our strength because of the Selling Peace Park initiative. Yeah.
And do you feel yourself, Paul, that you are at greater risk at this time, given the crisis that is sweeping across all the border areas in your country, in Myanmar? The Karen border area is on the eastern part of Myanmar, bordering, as you said, with Thailand, neighboring Thailand, with which it shares over 1,500 kilometer long border. And there has been a lot of porous crossing over these decades of conflict into Thailand. But given the fact that there's COVID right now, and there's also a military government in control in Thailand right now, has that made it harder for people to find safety and sanctuary? And do you feel that you are being targeted or your colleagues are at risk?
Right. This time, we see different what do you call it, situations. The situations are, you know, like different from what we had experiences in the early 90s or late 90s. So because of COVID is one thing, and then the military coup, and then the relationship between the two countries, Thailand and Burma, Myanmar. So that's where, you know, like it's making it really difficult for the refugees or IDPs to flee to Thailand because of the one is the COVID restrictions, and the other one is also Thai humanitarian policies that only accept people for temporary or even, you know, less than a week or 2 weeks. Yeah, it's like that. So and then the really access to really these IDPs and refugees is really restricted and very difficult to deliver aid to them. And then also for the security, it's hard to say because of the the relationship between the two countries on the authorities, because of the along the border, it's really under the control of the Thai military. So even, you know, like they are not allowed, you know, civil societies and relief organizations and Thai NGOs are not allowed also to access the area, and that's make it really difficult. And also journalists are not allowed either. So that means really what we are depending on now is really on their social media and people, you know, who use Facebook and, you know, messengers and Signal, yeah, to send us information. Of course, we have other communication channel, and also sometimes the people call from inside using the Myanmar SIM card. So that's how we coordinate, and also we have regular monitoring trips. So that's how we communicate with our people. Yes.
I would like to turn for a moment back to Faith, because just prior to joining this panel discussion this evening, there was some urgent news from Myanmar about one of your colleagues, Paul, another brave and courageous human rights defender. I'm going to share my screen at this time to show this news, and I'd like to just give a little bit of a forewarning that it's somewhat graphic for those that are viewing, to let you know. This is an urgent report that was received from the Myanmar Alliance for Transparency and Accountability about the arrest and shooting of Manza Myemong. Faith, can you talk a little bit about this? He is somebody who is in a very different geographical area than where Paul is, in Sagaing region, which is much more to the western side of the country, but someone who, like Paul, like the work that EIA and ERI was doing, is involved with protecting the communities and looking into the root causes of the corruption and the profiteering from the harvesting of these resources at any cost, including the oppression and dissemination of populations. So can you talk a little bit about his work and what this means and the urgent call for his release?
Yeah, we received this news just literally before all of us came together here tonight. And MARTA, the Myanmar Alliance for Transparency and Accountability, is an extraordinary network, one that I think Marco knows well. I'm sorry, Marco, if you hadn't got this news before, but Sagaing region, like you say, is quite important, and they've got some amazing, amazing environmental and human rights activists there. So it was this morning, or I guess yesterday morning now, June the 8th, somebody called him up for a meeting, and he went to go and meet with them. The soldiers were there, they shot him, and then they captured him. The Alliance is wanting everybody to know about this. They are very concerned. Well, they're more than concerned, they're really worried. They really believe that the military is going to kill him. Now, why him in particular? He is a really key activist who has exposed a lot of corruption in the area. He was also very much part, I can never say this word, I do apologize, of the Letbong mining crisis that occurred a few years back. And he has been instrumental in providing information through the network in order to expose and push for transparency on natural resources and what was happening. So I'm really grateful for you to share this tonight. I hope my friends in Burma realize that we will be calling very loudly as they have requested for us to do. On that note, I would just like to very quickly jump back to Paul a second, if you don't mind, Jeannie, because Marco was talking about all of the revenues and oil and gas. I've been talking about all the profits and the revenues from timber. But as Paul can explain, there's another area here which will have a direct impact on the spiritual and also environmental parts of Karen, and that's the dams and the whole issue of how the junta is really desperate for hard currency, and they are going back to all of these ridiculous hydropower projects around the country. So Paul, I think maybe, do you want to just speak a little bit about what you know about that now? Because it's very relevant to the fact that natural resources are the things that are going to be profiting these guys who are controlling the country.
And Paul, if I might ask before you go to the dams, I thought it would be interesting for our viewers to know, what is the relationship between ethnic communities like the Karen, like the ethnic communities across Myanmar, when we talk about the forests and the rivers and the dams and the mines and the exploration? What is the connection to your culture historically? You know, in that the land is actually part of the soul of the people. Can you talk about that a little bit, and then tell us about these hydroelectric mega infrastructure projects?
Yes, thank you, Jeannie. Really, when we call ourselves indigenous people, that means something very unique. Why? Because indigenous people always have a very close relationship with the land, the natural resources, the territories. And then the relationship to be able to continue and healthy and what you call it, strong, that we should have a governance institutions. Yeah. So we have the, you know, like leaders, either traditional leaders or elected leaders, that really uphold these we call rule and regulations that really bind us together. So that's why we see the whenever indigenous people live, we see a very good forest, healthy rivers. We have rich biodiversity, right? So this is the result of the what we call it, governance systems of indigenous people, right? And they always, indigenous people we don't consider ourselves as owning the land, like the word ownership, because we are not the owner of the land, but we are the custodians of the lands and environment. So, meaning we have the duty to really take care, and by take care of the lands and natural resources, we also get the benefit from them. Yeah. So if we destroy it, and then we have impact on us. So this is the relationship that we have. That's why it is very different concept than the centralized control of the natural resources by having law policies and even the law enforcement agency like forest rangers, forestry rangers, etc., to really come and control. That will never happen, right? That's why we, in the Salween Peace Park, we really focus on the indigenous people as the ancestral custodians of the territories, and that's really strengthening that institutions that will really move forwards in any political situation. Right? So that's why in the work of the Salween Peace Park, we also are revitalizing this relationship. And the relationship is not just only physical, but it's spiritual. Because when I say spiritual, meaning we also believe that the environment also has a guardian spirits, right? And for us, we are the physical or human guardians. And in order to really use something from nature, we have to ask permission from the spiritual guardians, right? So if we don't get permission and we violate the natural law, we will be punished, right? So this is why we have a really relationship like that, right? So that's part of our work of really revitalizing our culture, our belief. Yeah. So then may I continue to answer?
Yes, and before you do, I just wanted to let our listeners know and our viewers that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We still have time, and we'd love to hear your questions or comments. We had one comment from a viewer, Reverend Karen, who was saying that she felt that there was a resonance in what you were saying with her, because she was citing the old growth forests in British Columbia, in Canada, on First Nation lands also being exploited. So it's a pattern, of course, that we see globally with Indigenous people. But please do tell us about these hydroelectric power projects and the dams.
Yeah. So really, the Salween dams, they have what you call it, cascades of dam planned on the Salween River, and at least one active dams in the heart of our current territory. It is called Haji Dam. And then we've been really doing a campaign against this dam for at least more than 2 decades. And then by establishing the Salween Peace Park, we are saying that we forever, we kind of kill this project. We're not going to let it go anyway. And because what we said that building any dams on the Salween River, they need to really consult us. They need to get our permission, our collective decisions. And that's why we are building this peace park, in order to really, increase our voice against this destructive project. And there are also many other dams in the country, but as in particular on the Salween River. And when recently the head of the military junta announces and really supported this project, including one project in I think in Shan State, and also giving it to the Chinese companies. And then they also, when May Online visited Karen State, he also supported the Haji Dam. And like for us is how we know that they need hard currency, like Simon said, because of by building dams, they will receive millions of dollars from the companies, and that's why they are really like proposing or even giving permission But we know very well that in our area, we will not let that happen easily. It's been always the dams in our current state is always a flashpoint of conflict. Every time they push forward with that, lots of fighting is happening around the area. So now, why they are coming up really with this project again, and you can see very clearly that they are really bringing in Chinese, again, Chinese companies and Chinese government support to this project. So it shows politically that they are really giving favor to the Chinese government. So I think the Faith and Simon can talk a lot about that politics, and that's why we are not only dealing with the internal problems, we are also dealing with the geopolitics and right now, right? So anyway, this project, as I said, our current people will not allow it, and even the current National Union will also not allow this to be kind of pushed forward at this particular time.
Thank you so much. I'd like to take a question from one of our viewers, from Kenneth, and this is something for either Faith or Marco, perhaps both. And this helps us kind of turn a corner too, to find out what actions people can take. If there's any campaigns currently that you have, or websites you can direct people to, if they're interested to take actions from what they've heard tonight. And the question is there any, are we unwittingly buying products that are made with exploited resources when we're shopping at major brands? And are there any brands that we should be avoiding, or that there's a call for a boycott? Would you like to take that?
That's a great question. I would like to appeal to every billionaire on the planet to stop buying bloody teak, okay? So, I mean, that's a completely different level, but I think that I really don't, because we're looking at products here that we're looking at the raw material that is going into very high-end, really high-end stuff. But I would suggest that if anybody is looking at flooring, if anybody is looking at using hardwoods, not just from Burma, but especially from Burma, I would suggest that you ask the retailer where on earth it's from, and do that. Can they trace it back to the origin? Because by law they should be able to do that. And it's pushing the transparency about where you're getting your stuff from. In terms of oil and gas, I have no idea. Marco, maybe you would know better than me. I have no idea, because it goes in everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, that you're not going to be using natural gas from Burma or Myanmar unless you're an electricity user in Thailand or China. But you may be, buying from these companies. As I said, Chevron and Total are the major Western companies involved. And so while there hasn't been a call for a consumer boycott, we certainly encourage pressure on these companies to do the right thing and start blocking all payments to the regime. And essentially the argument is that they should be putting all these payments in escrow, essentially, and in a safe trust account until a democratic government can be restored, because this is not the government of Myanmar. It is essentially a criminal gang that's taken over the machinery of government. And increasingly it can't even function as a government, as vast numbers of civil servants are walking off the job every day. But I would also say, if folks are looking for things to do, wherever you are, putting pressure on your own government for comprehensive sanctions, both unilaterally, multilaterally, and at the United Nations is important here. We know that some of these companies, especially the Chinese, Thai, and Indian companies, they are not likely to take action on their own, and their governments aren't likely to take action. There's been a lot of talk about the Thai government tonight and how it's not necessarily a good faith partner for advancing democracy and human rights in Myanmar. So there are steps that the international community can take to restrict the financial flows. And all these payments go through banks that are players in the international system. And so governments have the power to basically tell the banking industry, look, you can't process payments to this military regime. You can't process payments through, for the benefit of the Myanmar oil and gas enterprise. And you have to freeze all these accounts right now. That's what we would do with any other criminal gang in the world. And just because this one is claiming to be the government of Myanmar makes it no different.
You're absolutely right. And I would say that, like earlier, I explained how the US was pretty quick off the mark to target MTE. It's not just MTE, it's also about being able to target individuals who are profiting, and they are using US dollars and the US currency for that. So it's quite a good tool to use. But now my own country hasn't done it. The EU hasn't done it. The UN hasn't done it. I don't know what they're waiting for and what they're faffing about, but basically that is the call. The EIA and all of our activist friends inside Myanmar are calling for them to sanction directly.
So Faith, for our American audience, can you please help us define faffing?
Messing about.
Messing about.
Faffing around.
As we close, Paul, I'd like to return to you for the last comments, because I think it's important for people to understand that prior to the military coup, and in fact for decades, the Karen people have been challenged by this very brutal dictatorship that has taken a huge toll both on the land and the people. But your organization is also empowering people. You're educating people to know what their rights are, to be able to give themselves a voice to amplify what those rights are in the face of this dictatorship, and to imbue them with the courage to do so. I'd like you to just talk a little bit about that as we close, so that people understand that your work is continuing despite this military coup. And I'd like to remind everybody who's viewing or listening that if you go on our website and our speaker forum, every one of our speakers, when you click on it, it will link to the website of the organization they're connected to. So please do take time to look at KESAN's website and EIA and ERI. So Paul, I'm going to just, as you're speaking, share a photograph of this majestic Salween River, which is very much flowing in the central heart of your community. And it's just such a beautiful place. And as you're speaking, I'm also going to share a photo of Karen protesters standing up against one of those dams you referred to earlier. So tell us about what you're going to do, what's the future plan for KESAN despite this military coup, and why we need to support you.
Yes, the importance, as I said earlier, that the people is key, and to empower people and to empower our governance systems is the very important that in whatever political situation we are in, if we are strong, we should be able to overcome those challenges. That's been our really key activities in the region. And as I said, if we still have strong governance, we can still keep the balance between the use of the natural resources and also conserving it as well. So we are keeping that balance. And also, when we have strong governance, we should be able to defend our territories and resources, and as well as also sustaining our territories. We call it territory of life. So we keep doing that, and then as well as the documenting what's really happening, documenting what really happening to the land, to the environment, as well as what's really happening in the area in relation to conflict, human rights violations, and doing the advocacy. So this is what we've been doing. And then what I would like to really make it clear that the Salween Peace Park is a unique case to show that we really want a federal system in the country. And we've been doing is reflecting the kind of federal system that we ethnic people in Burma want. That's why I wanted to stress that. And then we are not just only really keep asking things from the government or the international community, but we are doing it and we are offering a solution that this is the kind of solution that we want. And we've been learning also from other indigenous people around the world, from Canada, from Australia, New Zealand, from Latin America, many good stories, about the kind of indigenous people conserve territories. Yeah. So this is the offer, the solution we are offering. And really, we are really calling for the appropriate recognition of our indigenous people's rights and also adequate support from the government. Yeah.
And this photograph that I've just been sharing of the Karen protesters has a flag proudly flying above this little banka, which is not the flag of Myanmar, but it is the flag of Kotule, which is what the Karen people call their land. In closing, would you like to say something about Kotule, and is there anything you would also like to share in your own language and that you can translate to us of an appropriate closing offering in Karen language for the work that you're doing towards peace?
In Karen language?
Yes.
Kotule means what's called a land without evil. So means a peaceful land. We see the green forest, healthy rivers, and healthy relationship between our Karen people and nature. That's why we call it Kotule. In Karen, Kotule miweda le gola to oda ta eta thoba. Ta eta thomi do obane oda tam ta ku oda ta eta kui ta hitala ta ba twerilo le amnu le community le poko nature do we paganyo le umule awe Kotule na Kotule miweda kumubati people chiko oda baba kato baba tuto di tole takabatinya papano. Kotule is our ancestral territory. We will continue to defend it. We continue to sustain a healthy relationship with it.
And may you do so with strength and with safety, Paul. And we thank you so much again for joining us on this important discussion from Thailand. Again, Paul Sein Twa, one of the co-founders of KESAN, a Goldman Award winner, Faith Doherty from the Environmental Investigation Agency, joining us in the wee hours from London, Marco Simons from Earth Rights International. If you have enjoyed this discussion, if you have looked at any of the incredible film offerings that we have at the Burma Spring Benefit Film Festival, if your heart has been moved, we hope you will open your heart and we hope you will open your wallet. Every part of what you donate will be going into Myanmar, Burma, to support the nonviolent movement for democracy, human rights, and social justice. We would really appreciate your support. We'd like to thank our technical support team, the engineers tonight, Max and Greg, and the entire festival team who have been working tirelessly to bring this to you. And please donate if you can. Myanmar, Burma is in a crisis. It is a country of magnificence, of beauty, of potential, not only in its natural resources, but its human resources. So thank you, each of you, for sharing your expertise tonight. Please join us for another panel discussion tomorrow. That is Wednesday, June 9th. That is the only panel that will be at 5 p.m. instead of 6 p.m. And it is a discussion about refugees and the looming humanitarian crisis. We will be joined by Sally Thompson, who has been working with the refugees at the Thailand-Burma border for decades. She's the executive director of the Border Consortium, and she will be joined by Eric Schwartz, the president of Refugees International, and Myra Degapao, who's also Karen, who is associated with the US Campaign for Burma. Please join us tomorrow at 5. And thank you all. Keep Burma in your hearts. Please donate what you can. Tableau, Paul.
Tableau.
Tableau.
Tableau.